Welcome, everyone, to this very special episode of Just Joshing. I am your host, Joshua Pantalleresco. I write stuff in podcast too, and today is special. This is my narration debut, ladies and gentlemen. My first narration, my first audiobook creation is about to be released into the world. When I made the decision to do this, it wasn't an unconscious decision. It's something I was thinking about probably for about a year, actually. But in light of what's happened this year, I realized that, stories are more powerful than they ever were. And if I'm being very honest with myself, I'm a storyteller who likes telling stories, but who also likes listening to and presenting stories. So this feels like a very natural fit for what I do. And once I made the announcement, my friend and my first client, Brad C. Anderson, went to me and went, I want to turn my book into an audiobook. Can you do that for me? And so I did. Duatero by Brad C. Anderson is this reading today, and it's read by me. So for this particular one, I thought I'd do something, a particular chapter in the story I really, really enjoyed, which is chapter 9. This was fun to do. Like, this whole experience was really, really fun to do. It's really interesting given someone else's story and kind of making it your own in your own way. It was a lot of fun to do, and definitely something, I thought anyway, that would present an interesting challenge, and it has. There's still, I learned an awful lot even about my stuff in terms of podcasting and sound editing. For most of the last 3 weeks, all I've been doing is playing with sound, and I've learned an awful lot of doing it. So, that all said, without further ado, I'm going to give you guys chapter 9 of Duatero. All right, let's get to it, shall we?
This episode of Just Joshing is sponsored by Indie Imprint. Indie Imprint supports creators by creators. Whether you are writing a book or creating a video game, Indie Imprint works with its clients to produce, edit, and present their projects to the world. For more information, check out their website at www.indieimprint.com.
Chapter 9. Transiri, a tarnished crown on a hilltop, had once been my home. The contours of the land fit into my memory like a puzzle piece. I approached a gentle swell in the road, one last bump before ascending the hill that would take me to town. I had forgotten this bump, a marker I had used as a child to gauge how much longer until I hit town limits. The founder roads between Lanhu, Zwanhi, and Port Donna once met in Transiri. It was a hub, a junction between realms. That was centuries ago. Now the road leading south to the ruins of Port Donna was abandoned. With the great city's destruction, Malamiko advanced, pushing into Transiri's borders. It was a hard land to work. I remember Dad struggling to hew a life from it. I remember bitter summers of toil and labor and disappointment. Tomorrow was the call. I could have made it earlier, but didn't intend to ride till late, but my feet were slow. This was the first time I'd walked this road since Dad's funeral. I had avoided coming here. Not overtly, mind you, but never felt right coming home. Felt like I hadn't finished the business I abandoned my family to complete, and so I found it easy to distract myself with work. Malamiko always threatened, my mission still unfinished, still too soon for my triumphant return. There is a strange feeling when returning home after an absence. The brown mudstone buildings lining the road, many too poor to even have a coat of plaster, looked as I remembered them, and yet they were alien. My memories were ghosts of an existence that had died on the day I'd left. These buildings had lived a life since then, aging under sun and rain and wind. Those who stayed behind built new structures and repaired old ones. The faces of the people were different, as though the cast of players populating my childhood had been replaced by different actors. As a boy, people in town would say hello, greeting me by name. Now, strangers gawked at the Facillo striding by. How would my family react to seeing me? Gaha was heartbroken when I first left the door in the Tero Corinto. I remember her tears late one spring night under dark clouds as she begged me to stay. We'd been so close in age. We'd shared the entirety of our lives to that point together, and I broke her heart. Little Fondo, my only surviving brother, was proud of me. His idol was going to join the Tero Corinto. He was too young to understand what that really meant. My mother had buried 6 of her children. She was used to letting go. She held me in a brace for long moments, then released me. Be good, Credo, she'd said. I'd seen them all at Dad's funeral. Gaha had grown into a handsome woman, married, her first child sitting on her hip. Mother misses you terribly, she told me after Dad's service while she and I walked in the garden surrounding the pagoda. She'll never say anything to you. Doesn't want to distract Falcillo from his important duties. She would be happy if you visited. I'd be so happy. A year later, Eta Montento happened, and I learned how fragile our existence on Duatero is, how close we are to the brink. I had abandoned my father and joined the Falcillo to keep my family safe. How could I face them while their crops still failed and Malamico invaded their fields? Unfinished business. Time passed. I wandered through town and found myself on a street I never frequented as a child. We grew up outside of town on a farm. There were no stores on the street to visit. I had no friends along this road, had no reason to walk along it. Gaha and her family lived here now. I remembered it from Dad's funeral. The boy she bounced on her hip would be almost a man now, with a brother close behind. She lived a life on the street, a street that meant nothing to me. A river branches, the new stream carves a course for itself out of dirt and stone with only memories of the shared path behind it. A woman came to the door of the building I stood in front of, stepping out onto the road. For a moment, I thought it was my mother, but no, it was Gaha. How had so much time really passed? The girl I knew was gone. Deep lines of worry and care creased her face now. Hunger pulled at her skin. She was gaunt but had a stout frame, a woman who worked hard all her days, who'd hewn a life out of the borderlands between Duatero and Malamico. Credo, is that you? She said. It is. She came and hugged me. You look so old, she said, crushing me in her arms. For moments we stood like that, holding each other. How's Mom? I asked. Gaha pulled away, a smile on her lips and tears in her eyes. She will be so happy to see you. Fondo's coming over later. We'll all be together again. She led me inside to a small, cramped room, a faded carpet on the dirt floor, bright tapestries hung on the wall illuminated by a fire in a nearby hearth. Her husband greeted me. I shook hands with my nephews, one a little taller than me, the other just about even. Credo? A voice said from the far end of the room. In my memory, my mom is a giant. Strong and kind, she was my world as a child. I recognized my mother's face on the woman coming forward, but little else. Where once my mother was tall, she was now bent, her back hunched at right angles. Where once my mother was strong, age had wasted her muscles away, her step fumbling and uncertain. Her eyes still held kindness, though. So much joy. Oh, Credo, she said, my brave Falcillo is home. My heart sank to see how frail she had become. She was a mountain, eroded by years of blowing wind and driving rain until only a shallow hill remained. I was afraid if I held her too tight, she'd crumble into sand, slipping away through my fingers. She showed no such fear. She hugged me with all the tremulous might her thin arms retained. Tomorrow night I'm going to dine with Father, she said, her voice a whisper in my chest, and Tondra, Paulo, and all my missing children. Tomorrow night I'm going to meet the founders. I needed to be strong, to keep a brave face so she would keep her courage as she made the sacrifice Duatero had called on her to make. I wasn't sure if I had that kind of strength, if anyone did. I know, Mom. She pulled back, looked at me anew, wonder in her eyes. Is that your Carasso? I hadn't worn it for Dad's funeral. Was this really the first time she'd seen my Carasso? It is. I pointed to the image of a bird with a twig in its mouth, etched in my breastplate. It arrived on the Jingwei, worn by Founder Todd C. Levet, Trooper First Class. She lightly touched the image on my chest, whispering, Founder Todd C. Levet. She looked at me with so much pride, tears rimming her eyes. It's beautiful. This was touched by a founder, and it protected him from harm. She looked at the image on my chest again, eyes wide with wonder. I have never touched a founder artifact before. Father would be so proud of you. A commotion at the front door pulled our attention. Little Fondo and his family arrived. He saw me, smiled, crossed the room, and embraced me in a hug. I had stopped to think of him as Little Fondo. He'd grown into a man, working the land my father had worked. He was so much younger than me, just a boy when I left. Now, his face had taken a beating from the elements, all creases and folds of skin. He was thin, and his back stooped like my father's. He was being beaten down by the land that had beaten down Dad, and side by side, a stranger would have had a hard time telling whether he or I was the elder. We dined together as a family. We laughed at old stories. Gaha's younger son had a good voice, and he honored us with a song, my mother and sister singing along. They asked me to tell them of my time as Falcillo, and I told them Eta Montento, telling them of our harrowing attacks on 2 nests, and the riots that happened as the floodwaters forced us to wait in town before attacking the 3rd. I told them of the sentinel cracking Mihailo's leg, and the assault Aprilla and I made on the final host. I did not tell them of Aprilla's contamination, and how I had to cleanse her in the thick mud of spring rain. The night was dark enough with the call tomorrow. We'd been good friends, she and I. The rain reminds me of her. Another story, Fondo's youngest child, a girl just entering adolescence, demanded. I think it's time for bed, Fondo said, eliciting groans from the children. I could understand why Fondo wanted to stop the storytelling. He didn't want me filling his children's heads with tales that might inspire them to leave, following in my footsteps. And so, the final night with my mother came to a close, leaving me alone with nothing but the dark, sleepless hours before dawn. We gathered in the dirt road in front of Gaha's house in the morning. My mother's blue robes snapped as the late spring wind pulled on them. It didn't seem right that the wind should blow so hard today, whipping my mother's hair, chilling her as she prepared to make this great sacrifice for her people. She didn't seem to mind. She watched brown leaves from last fall pile up along the leeward side of the building, hunched, frail, with a smile on her face and love in her eyes. My sister readjusted Mom's robes and pinned her hair, making her look beautiful in defiance of the whistling wind. Down the street, another family clustered outside the door, grouped around a thin gray man and an old woman beside him, both in the blue robes of the called, both holding tightly to each other. The gray man was speaking to a young boy, extolling final words of love or perhaps advice, conveying something for the boy to take with him past this day. My young brother Fondo stepped out of the house onto the street, dressed in a tunic hanging just above his knees. The clothing was simple, roughly worn, but I could see he spent time cleaning it as best he could. He'd grown into a good man. My mother grasped my arm for support. I remember how you used to play in the leaves in our yard, she said to me. Do you remember? You were such a happy child. You'd run from pile to pile, jumping and crunching them under your feet. She looked at me with a smile. I have such good memories. How could that be true? She'd buried so many of her children before they reached the age of 5. Every year was a fight for survival, filled with constant fear Malamiko would advance further, taunting farmlands and contaminating neighbors. I remember you'd wrestle me down, Fondo said, smiling. I'd fight so hard, and I could never beat you. You'd grind leaves into my hair. Oh, Mom said with a guilty laugh. Father never liked when you did that. He set me to cleaning yard, I said, remembering. Nearby, the pagoda bell rang. An unnatural stillness settled over the town. It was time. I exchanged a look with Gaha. Her lips tight, she closed her eyes, turned away. Fondo came up beside her, placed an arm around her shoulder. Such good memories, Mom said, patting my arm. Silence hung in the air. Even the wind calmed. I remember one of my math tutors at the Terra Coranto explaining how you could divide the interval between any two numbers in half, and then divide those in halves again, and then again, all the way to forever. Imagine that! An infinity between moments, an eternity between the fall of each grain of sand in the hourglass. I couldn't make my legs move, didn't want to say a word, didn't want to breathe or do anything that might set the gears of time turning, sending the next grain of sand crashing down like a wave dashing a child's castle built on the sandy banks of a river. Your father is waiting for me, my mother said, her voice quiet. I had a dream last night. He came to me. He told me not to be afraid. He'll be there, waiting for me, where he can hold me, and he'll never have to let me go. Come, she said, waving Gaha and Fondo closer. She grabbed Fondo's hand, placed it on her shoulder, held on to Gaha with one hand, me with the other. I want all my children to hold me as I walk. She began to shuffle down the street, short steps, unstable. Gaha and I had to support her as she led us toward the pagoda. Along the way, we joined others wearing the blue robes of those marked for the call. Old men, old women, a young boy with a lame leg shuffling on wooden crutches, others, so many of them, joining our ranks, family and friends surrounding each of them with damp faces, dams too weak to hold back tears. Behind us, townsfolk, those lucky enough to not have someone in the call, slowly followed. No one spoke a word. Only the whisper of wind and tramp of feet hung in the air as we approached the pagoda grounds. As we entered the courtyard, Fondo's and Gaha's children began sitting down on cushions and blankets for the rest of us to sit on. As we waited, Mom spoke quiet words to Fondo, hugging him with all the strength her frail arms possessed. She moved to Gaha with her weak, faltering steps, a whispered exchange, a hug given, a hug received. She came to me. I did not know if I had the strength to face this. She looked up at me. She was once so tall. Placed a cold hand on my cheek, her eyes wet with tears. I have prayed for you every day of your life, she said, controlling her voice through tears that wanted to come. Who would pray for me now? I have prayed for your safety as you face Malamiko. I've prayed for your happiness, Credo. Since you've gone, I've prayed you find what it is you search for. Find what you search for, Credo. Find it and be happy. She hugged me with all her strength. I held her as I would a delicate, dried flower that you might shield from the wind, lest it blows to pieces. She pulled away, held me at arm's length, looking up at me. Be good, Credo. I will. My voice was the raspy whisper of dry sand crunching underfoot. Be good. She struggled to settle into her cushions, her 3 children rushing to aid her. I sat on mine, looked around the courtyard, and seeing for the first time the number of those called to the call. This seemed like a deeper cut than that of 29 to my eyes. Not all of those called seemed so old. Beyond the families of the called, the entire town gathered, young children clinging to the legs of mothers staring at us with curious eyes. A middle-aged man in the yellow robes of the Curasisto came to us and kneeled before my mother. "Founders, thank you," he said, head bowed. He stayed like that a moment in reverent silence. Then he placed a wooden cup in front of her filled with a liquid. "When the bell rings, drink it all, quickly. You'll fall asleep, and then you'll dance among the founders." He covered the cup with a wooden plate and moved on to the next family. None of us looked at the cup, ignoring it with iron determination. The pagoda's Duatero, a woman I didn't recognize, stood before the gathered town, gave a sermon I didn't hear, read verses from the Mendebraj that slipped by me unnoticed, and prayed prayers that my mind did not register. She fell silent. I closed my eyes, trying to grasp the eternity between the falling grains of sand. The pagoda's bell rang, a sharp peal cracking the morning. A moment hung, then my mother shifted. "I'm going to father now." She leaned forward, taking the plate off the cup none of us looked at. "Will it hurt?" "No, Mom," I said. From my training at the Duatero Corinto, I knew well what would happen. You'll fall asleep, you'll dream, and then you'll be with Dad. The finality of these words struck me with surprising strength. A sling bullet hit me in the chest, and I had to look away. I had to be strong for her, giving her the strength she needed. She raised the cup. "Founders, guide my children," she said. Her voice soft, she spoke her last prayer of this life. Eyes squeezed shut, she gulped the drink down. "What happens now?" she asked. I took the cup from her, set it aside. "You lie down now," I said. Her children helped her lay back, her head nestled in Gaja's lap. Fondo held one of her hands, I the other. "How long will it take, Credo?" she asked, looking up at me with eyes I would never see again. "Not long. You'll feel tired soon. When you do, close your eyes. Dream. I think I feel it already. Would it happen so soon? Is this how it's supposed to happen? Close your eyes, Mom." She did. Dream. My voice tore at my throat. Fondo's head was bowed, tears dripping from his eyes. Gaja ran her hand along Mom's head, humming a gentle tune, a lullaby I remembered from my childhood. Mom's chest rose and fell rhythmically as she breathed. Several pasajistas were going throughout the courtyard, distributing plates of food, platters filled with round loaves of bread, piles of fruits, stacks of cheese, bowls of honeycombs, and carafes of beer with cups for all. Mom's chest rose and fell as the wind whistled through the trees in the pagoda garden. Her breathing came shallow, her body seized. I clutched her hand tightly. I heard a sob. It was my own. Her body relaxed. Her chest rose no more. She was gone. I held her hand in mine, held it tight, as I had a moment ago when she was alive. But the only mother I had now is one of memories. Such a small, subtle difference between life and death. Is that all it takes to end the life of a woman who brought me into this world? As the eldest, I still had duties to perform. I took the carafe of beer, poured out a drink for each of us, even Fondo's young children. We waited as around the courtyard similar scenes played out. Once the last of the called had passed, the Duatero who had given the earlier sermon grabbed her cup, stood, and addressed us. "Founders, greet our heroes," she called out, her voice loud, trembling with emotion. She turned her cup upside down, spilling its contents into the dirt. Around the courtyard, throughout the streets beyond, we overturned our cups, every one of us, our drinks splashing on the ground, a libation, our first offering to our newest ancestors to enter the spirit world. "The called loved us," the Duatero said. She moved to a platter of food she had at hand, exchanged her cup for a loaf of bread. "They died so we'd have food. They died so we'd know hunger no more. Now, we honor their sacrifice by breaking bread. Treasure the gift they have given us. Remember this gift with each meal you eat from now until the founders call you home." She led us in prayer. Before the bread, the baker. Before the baker, the miller. Before the miller, the farmer. Before the farmer, the land. Before the land, the Duatero Corinto. Before the Duatero Corinto, Donna. TL is stew. I reached for our bread, broke it, passed pieces to Gaja, Fondo, all their children, and then, though none of us had an appetite, we ate, the food dry in our mouths, tasting like ash. Gaja and Fondo had invited me to stay, to journey with them to our family's mausoleum out by the farm where we put Mom to rest. But the morning after the call, I hugged them both and made my way back to Vojo Fino and my fellow Pachilo, pushing my curiosity to its limits. The look on Gaja's face when I told her I was leaving. How many times would I break her heart? But I am Pachilo, a maestro Pachilo, scythe of the founders. I hunt Malamico to keep Duatero safe. The battle with the land broke my dad and sent a half-dozen of my siblings to the grave. And now, after decades away, I came back only to hold my mom's head as she was called. Mom died, Dad died, because I failed. Gaha and Fondo could never understand that. To them, Malamiko is a capricious force of nature, a hardship to bear as one bears the spring floods. But I'm supposed to protect Duatero from it. I left to save them, and each funeral I returned for was a beacon of my failure. Mom died proud of her son, the Falcillo, never realizing the call happened because Malamiko beat me. Our crops withered while I scratched my head and impotently rooted through the dirt. No more. No more! I'll die before I let Malamiko force another call on us. I marched like a person possessed, my Carresso propelling me to great speed, catching only brief hours of sleep. It was late at night when I stormed into the outpost at Valjo Fino. I hammered on the doors where my Falcillo slept. Where were they? Credo? Someone behind me asked. I spun on the voice. It was Esper, her brow etched with worry, a candle in her hand casting dancing shadows on the wall. Where are the others? I demanded. She stepped back from my anger. I don't... Where? Talia, I think, is at the inn, Esper said. Get her. Get Jack. Get them both here. Go! She ran off. I lit lamps and then paced in circles around the shrine in the outpost's main chamber. Jack arrived first, running. He was wise enough to say nothing, sensing my mood. I continued pacing. Esper and Talia finally ran into the room. Credo, are you okay? Talia asked, breathing heavily. Someone in this town knows why the crops are dying, I said. The nest we cleanse. Someone knows how they got infected. Friends of their kids, neighbors, someone knows how they brought contamination into our lands. Find them. Bring them in. I want answers. I caught an eager look in Jack's eyes. Good. We needed to get aggressive. Mihailo told us about your mom, Talia said. Do you think maybe we should take some time? Time? I said. Time? By the time I was 6 years old, my mother had buried 6 of her children. 6! If our family took time for every fucking funeral, we'd never have accomplished anything. All 3 of them stood dumbfounded, eyes wide. I just sullied our language. I needed to get control. Friends of their kids, friends of Rodolfo, his wife, neighbors, get them. Bring them in. Talia looked at me, uncertain. Now? It's the middle of the night. Yes, now. You can dance when we stop Malamiko. I want answers. Let me help you tell your story. I offer a variety of audio services. I will narrate, I will produce, I will edit, and I will master your file so that it will be ready for Audible and Spotify. And if you don't want me to narrate your story, whether you want to do it or get someone else, I will help you find the right person for the job. All in all, I just want to help you tell your story. Let me help you. For information on my rates and services, please click the link below in the podcast description, jpantalleresco.wordpress.com for more details. Well, what you guys think? I'm really curious what you guys think about this. I had a blast doing this. Duatero is very much Credo's story. He's definitely a complex character. As much as you feel for him in this chapter, chapter 10, oh man. I was like, holy crap, I can't believe he did that. And I'm not going to spoil it, but when you read it, it's like, wow. Like, unbelievable what he's willing to do, where his grief drives him to. Very complex character. This book is it reminds me of some of the stuff, a little bit of what Ursula Le Guin would write, a little bit of Anne McCaffrey is definitely, I kind of feel like is a bit into this. Malamiko and Thread, there's definitely, I could feel the homage, a little bit of a homage there, but on that note, it's a very unique story. It's a very tough place. Duatero is a very tough place to survive, and survival is a very big part of what's going on. Brad does a really good job dealing with faith, doubt. Like, all the characters in there are very human. Credo is probably the most human of them all. He's kind of hitting that moment in his life where, he needs to change. And maybe he does, maybe he doesn't. But this chapter right here, chapter 9, is that point where things grow. This was my favorite chapter in the whole book. Well, I liked chapter 23 too. 23 was very much... the other main character in the story was Talia. One of the bigger main characters in the story. It was her. And I enjoyed voicing Talia quite a bit. She was so much fun to do. So I have a little bit of that in me. Let's see, in other news, I got a writing deadline tonight, and if I get it, I get a small dream of mine possibly coming true next week. I'm not going to go into details just yet, but that's really cool. You're going to see interviews from me from a couple of places this month. One of them, though, is tonight, live after reading. I'm on Tim Niederreiter's show, and we talk about the creative process. He's going to be a guest on my show later this week. I really admire Tim's writing process. It's actually quite brilliant. So definitely check that out. And if you are interested in hearing what I got to say and want my services, definitely. There's going to be a more comprehensive list of what I'm doing. I've got some really good advice, and I'm taking it. So definitely check out my page if you're interested in hearing me voice your book. This was a lot of fun to do, and Brad, thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to do it. But now, that'll do it for this episode of Just Joshing. If you want to support the podcast, you can do so a number of different ways. Subscribe to the podcast. I'm on iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher, Deezer, and pretty much every other app you can imagine. Or you can just come to the Podmag and subscribe here too. That's one. Two, buy my books. Alice Zero and The Watcher are out this year. They're available now on Amazon. The Cloud Diver very shortly is going to be going wide. That's kind of be the next big project I'm doing. Beyond that, there's my audiobook services. If you want me to narrate your story, you want me to produce an audiobook for you, I can do both services. And I have one where you just want my voice. I can definitely put a voice to your story. If you want me to break the whole thing from start to finish, I can do that too. That'll be there, and prices will be there as well. So, beyond all that, yeah, stay inspired, keep surfing the chaos, and I'll talk to you guys soon. All right.
Josh.